The Quiet Mercy, Chapter 1, The Promise in the Haze. The hushed silence of the hospital room in Camden, Maine, was broken only by the rhythmic whisper of the life support machine. Each hiss and sigh was a stark reminder of Martha Thorne's existence, or what was left of it. Eleanor Vance, 40 years old, an architect accustomed to building structures, found herself staring at the collapsed architecture of her mother's life. Martha, a vibrant artist who had once filled every room with color and passionate debate, was now a fragile, unresponsive form, lost in the final stages of Alzheimer's, exacerbated by a massive stroke months ago. Ellie had held her mother's hand through countless quiet hours, listening to the monotonous hum, watching the steady, unchanging line on the monitor. Martha's beautiful, expressive face was now a mask of stillness. Dr. Ben Carter, a kind-eyed man whose compassion was evident even in his professional solemnity, had delivered the verdict weeks ago. No hope of recovery. No chance of her returning to them, even for a fleeting moment. But the machine kept breathing for her. The agonizing weight of a promise made years ago pressed down on Ellie's chest. Martha, in a rare, lucid window between the deepening fog of dementia, had looked at Ellie, her eyes sharp and clear, and held her gaze with an intensity that burned. "Ellie, my brave girl," she'd said, her voice thin but firm. "When the time comes, don't let me exist like a vegetable. Don't let me linger. Pull the plug. Promise me that." Ellie, choked with emotion, had promised. "I promise, Mama." She hadn't known then the full burden of such a vow. Now, that promise was a burning coal in her hand. Dr. Carter had explained the legal complexities. Without a notarized living will, which Martha, despite her meticulous nature, had never gotten around to drafting in her final, clear moments, disconnecting the machine was fraught with ethical and legal peril. "It's not as simple as flipping a switch, Ellie," he'd said gently. "We need clear documentation or a court order." But Ellie didn't want a court order. She wanted peace for her mother. She wanted to honor Martha's fierce, independent spirit. The thought of Martha, trapped in a body that refused to yield, haunted her. Martha, who had always believed in grace, in art, in the dignity of being alive. She spent the entire night by her mother's bedside, watching the sunrise paint the hospital room in soft hues of pink and gold. The world outside was waking up, but Martha remained in her deep, unmoving slumber. The nurses, accustomed to Ellie's vigil, drifted in and out, performing their quiet tasks. As dawn broke fully, Ellie made her decision. A quiet, agonizing resolve settled over her. This wasn't about legalities or hospital policy. This was about love, about mercy, about a promise made from heart to heart. When the nurse stepped out to prepare medications, leaving them alone for a few precious minutes, Ellie leaned close to Martha's ear. "I love you, Mama," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'm letting you go. It's okay." Her hand trembled as she reached for the power button on the machine, her fingers brushing the cold metal. Her breath hitched. A profound silence descended as the gentle hum of the apparatus ceased. The monitor flatlined, a stark, unbroken line. Martha's chest, which had been rising and falling mechanically, stilled. Ellie stood there, suspended between utter devastation and a strange, quiet sense of relief. She had done it. She had honored her promise, the quiet mercy, a profound, irreversible act. Chapter 2, The Impossible Note. Ellie woke hours later in the hospital's small, uncomfortable guest room, feeling as though she had been dragged through a hurricane. Her limbs ached, Her head throbbed, and her heart felt like a hollowed-out cavern. Yet, beneath the exhaustion, there was a fragile sense of peace. It was over. Martha was free. She went back to Martha's room, now quiet and still, to say her final goodbye. The bed was stripped, the equipment gone, leaving only the scent of faint disinfectant and the lingering ghost of her mother. Ellie sat on the edge of the bed, reaching out to smooth the tangled hair on Martha's pillow. And then she saw it. Neatly folded, tucked beneath the pillow, was a small cream-colored note. Her heart hammered against her ribs. It was Martha's stationery, with a faint watercolor floral print in the corner, and the handwriting, unmistakably Martha's. Clear, elegant, without the tremor or fragmented loops that Alzheimer's had imposed on her script for years. It was the handwriting of Martha in her prime, the artist, the vibrant woman. Ellie's hand trembled as she unfolded the note. "Ellie, my brave girl, you always knew when to let go. Thank you. On your path, there will be many questions. Seek the answers where light meets shadow. M." The words blurred. Ellie squeezed her eyes shut, then opened them again. The note was still there. The handwriting, still impossibly clear. How? How could this be? Martha had been in a deep coma, unresponsive, for months. This note, it couldn't have been written after she died, and she certainly hadn't been capable of writing it in the days leading up to her passing. The last time Ellie had seen her mother's clear handwriting was years ago, before the disease had stolen her ability to form coherent sentences, let alone such a perfect, coherent message. A chilling wave of doubt washed over Ellie. Guilt, sharper and more painful than anything she had felt before, twisted in her gut. Had Martha not been as deep in a coma as they thought? Had she been aware? Had she ended her mother's life when there was still a spark of consciousness, a thread of connection? The fragile peace she had felt moments ago shattered into 1,000 pieces. The quiet mercy now felt like a brutal, irreversible act. The note, meant perhaps as a final comfort, had instead plunged her into a terrifying abyss of uncertainty and self-reproach. Burning secret. The funeral, held a few days later in a quaint Camden church overlooking the harbor, was a blur of sympathetic faces and hushed condolences. Ellie moved through it like a ghost, haunted by the note, by the impossible handwriting. Her brother, Michael, who lived abroad and had flown in for the funeral, stood stiff and distant. He had expressed his disapproval of Ellie's decision over the phone, his voice cold and accusatory. Now, his silence was a heavy condemnation. "You should have waited, Ellie," he'd said to her just before the service. "You should have explored every option. You acted alone." Ellie swallowed, the words lodging in her throat. How could she explain the impossible note? How could she explain the promise? She had done what she believed was an act of love. Now, she wasn't so sure. And the crushing weight of her brother's judgment, piled on top of her own gnawing guilt, was almost unbearable. The question echoed in her mind, loud and relentless. She might find some clue, some explanation for the impossible note. She sifted through boxes of old photographs, sketchbooks, and correspondence. Each item felt like a touchstone, a memory of Martha before the Alzheimer's had taken her. Ellie remembered her mother, young and full of life, painting furiously in her studio. Her brow furrowed in concentration, her eyes alight with creative fire. Martha had always spoken of light and shadow in her art. Ellie, she'd often said, gesturing to a canvas, true beauty isn't just in the highlights. It's in the contrasts, in the way the light meets the shadow. That's where the truth of a thing lies. The phrase resonated with the note's cryptic instruction. Seek the answers where light meets shadow. Was this a clue? A metaphor for her art? Or for something deeper? Ellie called Sarah, Martha's best friend. Sarah had been a constant presence in Martha's life, a fellow artist, a confidant. Sarah, Ellie began, trying to sound casual. Do you remember Mom ever doing anything unusual with her writing? Or leaving notes in odd places? Sarah paused. Unusual? Martha was always unusual, darling. She was an artist, through and through. But yes, she did have a fascination with auto-writing, especially when she was younger, finding her voice in Boston. She said it helped her to channel her subconscious, to bypass the logical mind and let the hand move freely. A kind of meditative practice. She kept journals filled with all sorts of things, thoughts, fears, poems, anything to keep her mind sharp, to not lose herself. Did she ever write anything that seemed out of time or predict something? Ellie pressed, trying not to sound too desperate. Martha always had a knack for intuition, for seeing things others missed, Sarah mused. She used to say she felt the future, the past, and the present all at once, especially when she was painting. As for writing, her journals were very personal. She had a whole collection, especially from when her memory started to slip. She called them her anchor points, her way of holding on to herself. Ellie thanked Sarah, a new thread of hope weaving through her despair. Anchor points, auto-writing. The idea of Martha, even in her decline, desperately trying to hold on to her essence, to communicate beyond the fog of her illness, was both heartbreaking and inspiring. The summer cottage, a smaller, older structure further down the coast, was where Martha had done some of her best work. It was a place of quiet reflection, with a panoramic view of the ocean. Ellie decided to go there. Perhaps in the place where Martha had felt most alive, she would find the answers. The cottage was exactly as Martha had left it years ago, filled with unfinished canvases, dried paintbrushes, and the lingering scent of salt and oil paints. Ellie's gaze fell upon the old stone fireplace. It was an odd feature for a coastal cottage, somewhat out of place. She remembered Martha always saying she wanted to fix it, restore it to its former glory. Ellie ran her hand over the rough stone. Her fingers brushed against a subtle fissure, a line that looked too straight, too deliberate to be natural. She pressed. A small, almost imperceptible section of the stone wall shifted, revealing a shallow recess, a hidden compartment. Inside, carefully stacked, were dozens of small cream-colored notes, identical to the one she had found on Martha's pillow. They were neatly numbered, from 1 to 78, and beside them, a single, bound journal, its leather cover worn and faded. Ellie's breath hitched. This was it, the key. The full story of Martha's last, desperate attempt to communicate, to leave her mark, to reach beyond the veil of her own fading mind. The Quiet Mercy. Chapter 4. The Fragmented Chronicle. Ellie carefully retrieved the journal and the stack of numbered notes from the hidden compartment. She carried them to the sunlit porch of the cottage, where the rhythmic crash of waves against the rocks provided a stark, natural soundtrack. The journal was indeed Martha's, a chronicle of her slow descent into Alzheimer's. The early entries were clear, philosophical, filled with Martha's characteristic wit and artistic insights. She wrote about her growing fear of losing her mind, her terror of disappearing. "I must leave something behind," one entry read, dated 5 years prior. "A trail of breadcrumbs for Ellie. She'll know. She always knows." Then the entries became more fragmented, the handwriting more erratic, dates skipped, sentences dissolved into meaningless loops. It was a heartbreaking testament to the insidious progression of the disease. But then, every so often, a startlingly clear entry would appear, a brief, luminous window of lucidity. Martha would write with a piercing clarity, as if the fog had temporarily lifted. The notes, numbered 1 to 78, corresponded to entries in the journal. Many were mere scribbles, incoherent phrases, or abstract sketches, Martha's lost language. But others were breathtakingly clear. Mirroring the moments of lucidity in the journal, they were messages, wishes, and even predictions written during these precious windows of clarity. Ellie began to piece them together, matching notes to specific journal entries. She found one dated just a few months before Martha's stroke, when her dementia was already severe. It was note number 72. "I know you will doubt, my darling. You will carry the weight of this choice. But remember, when I say let go, it is not about death. It is about life, about your choice. My love will not end, Ellie. Seek me in the places where we felt most alive, there where my light meets your shadow." Ellie gasped, her eyes blurring. This was the exact sentiment from the note on her pillow, just phrased differently. But the handwriting was undeniably Martha's clear, healthy script. How could this be? And then, a realization. In the journal entry corresponding to note number 72, Martha had written, "A moment of pure clarity. I must capture it, for Ellie, for when she needs it most. A message from a future me to a future her. I will find a way to place it where she will find it, when she doubts." Martha had planned this. She had written these messages, anticipating her final decline, anticipating Ellie's agonizing decision and her subsequent guilt. She had found a way, in her windows of clarity, to leave behind these anchor points, these fragments of her true self, to guide and comfort Ellie. Ellie's mind raced. The note on her pillow, the impossible note, must have been one of these pre-written messages, placed by Martha herself during a rare, perhaps her last, moment of lucidity just before her stroke, or even in the very early days of the coma. When some minimal motor function might have remained, the sheer willpower, the love, the foresight required to do such a thing, it was staggering. Just then, Michael arrived, his face grim. He had driven down from Boston, still wrestling with his own anger and grief. He saw the notes, the journal. "What is all this, Ellie?" he asked, his voice clipped. "More of her delusions?" "No, Michael," Ellie said, her voice quiet but firm. "This is Mama. This is her last act of love." She handed him the journal and a handful of the clearer notes, including note number 72 and the note from her pillow. Michael read, his expression shifting from skepticism to disbelief, then to a profound, unsettling sadness. He flipped through the journal, seeing the progression of his mother's illness and the miraculous clarity of certain passages. And then, Ellie handed him note number 67. It was short, written in that clear, strong hand. "Michael, my son, always the skeptical one. Remember that rainy day in Boston? The one where you lost your favorite blue toy boat in the public garden pond, and I told you we'd find it, even though it was gone? You always needed proof. Here is mine. Know that I loved you, even when the fog was thick, and know that Ellie's love for me is as deep as the ocean. Michael's face crumpled. He remembered that day vividly. He had been inconsolable. No one else knew about the blue toy boat. No one. This was undeniably Martha, his mother, communicating from beyond the veil of her illness, from beyond the grave. Chapter 5, A Mother's Wisdom. The revelation of the numbered notes, especially note number 67, had a profound effect on Michael. His skepticism, a shield against the pain of his mother's illness and death, began to crack. He sat beside Ellie on the porch, silently reading through more of Martha's journal and notes. His initial anger slowly giving way to a dawning understanding. She was still in there, wasn't she? Michael whispered, his voice hoarse. Even when we thought she was gone, she was fighting. She was trying to reach us. Ellie nodded, tears streaming down her face. Yes, she was trying to tell us, to prepare us, to give us comfort. They spent the rest of the day and night together, poring over Martha's legacy. They discovered notes filled with profound wisdom, artistic insights, and surprisingly, even a few moments of dark humor, characteristic of Martha. Some notes were simply expressions of fear. The fog is coming. I must write. I must not lose myself. Others were messages of love, addressed to various family members and friends, each containing a private, specific detail only Martha and that person would know. One note, number 75, touched Ellie deeply. It was dated just days before Martha's massive stroke. The light is fading. Soon the shadow will cover everything. But in the deepest shadow, there is always a core of light. Ellie, my darling, you will find it. You are resilient. You are the one who knows when to make the hard choice. Do not regret it. I am ready. I am at peace. My release will be your freedom. The note she found on her pillow, the impossible note, was evidently the very last one Martha had managed to write, a final act of love and foresight, placed with extraordinary effort during a fleeting moment of clarity. Perhaps minutes before her stroke rendered her completely unresponsive, or even during the very onset of her coma, when some motor function lingered. It was Martha's final, desperate attempt to give Ellie peace, to absolve her of the guilt she knew Ellie would carry. Dr. Carter, when Ellie later cautiously shared the notes, though still not revealing the pillow note, listened with a mixture of professional curiosity and profound respect. "It's extraordinary," he murmured, his gaze distant. "We call these terminal lucidity, extremely rare, especially in cases of advanced dementia and coma. The brain, in its final moments, can sometimes achieve a fleeting, almost miraculous clarity. It's as if the essence of the person, that core self, shines through one last time before extinguishing. What your mother did, it's a testament to her spirit and her love for you." His words confirmed what Ellie now knew in her heart. Her decision had not been a betrayal. It had been an act of ultimate compassion, guided by Martha's profound and selfless love. Martha hadn't asked her to simply end her life. She had asked Ellie to find the light in the shadow, to release her when her journey of self-preservation, of creating these anchor points, was finally complete. The guilt that had gnawed at Ellie for weeks began to recede. replaced by a quiet, profound sense of gratitude. Her mother, even in her deepest decline, had given her the greatest gift, the gift of peace, of self-forgiveness. Chapter 6: The Shoreline of Forgiveness. The reconciliation with Michael was a slow process, but Martha's notes had opened a door that Ellie thought would remain forever closed. He read and reread the specific notes meant for him, seeing his mother's unwavering love and understanding, even of his own complexities. He began to see Ellie's agonizing decision not as an act of hastiness, but as an act of profound, selfless love. "I'm so sorry, Ellie," Michael said one evening, his voice soft, humbled. "I didn't understand. I was so angry, so hurt. I just saw the act, not the love behind it. She was trying to protect you, even to the very end." Ellie reached out and took his hand. "We were both hurting, Michael. We both loved her." The old cottage in Camden became a place of healing, not just for Ellie, but for their fractured family. They brought Martha's remaining paintings there, hanging them on the walls, allowing her vibrant spirit to fill the space once more. The cottage, once a quiet retreat, now felt like a living monument to Martha's strength, her resilience, and her enduring love. Ellie found solace in the simple routines of coastal life, walking the rocky beaches, listening to the rhythmic roar of the ocean. She thought of Martha, who had loved this place so fiercely, who had found so much inspiration in the interplay of light and shadow on the water. She took out the original note, the one from her pillow, and read it again. "Ellie, my brave girl, you always knew when to let go. Thank you. On your path, there will be many questions. Seek the answers where light meets shadow. M." The words no longer brought a wave of guilt, but a profound sense of peace. Martha had known. She had understood. She had given Ellie the permission, the blessing she so desperately needed. The light meets shadow wasn't just about art, Ellie realized. It was about life itself, about the dark moments, the impossible choices, and the light of love and compassion that could always be found within them. It was about forgiveness, forgiving Martha for the burden of the promise, forgiving Michael for his anger, and most importantly, forgiving herself. Ellie began to paint again, something she hadn't done since childhood. Inspired by Martha's journals, by her lifelong search for light in unexpected places, Ellie found her own creative voice. Her canvases explored the interplay of blues and grays, the vibrant colors of the Maine coast, the subtle shifts in light that transformed the familiar into the profound. It was a new chapter, a new form of healing, a way to honor her mother's legacy, not just by remembering her, but by living a life that reflected her wisdom. Chapter 7: The Unbroken Thread. Weeks turned into months. The quiet mercy that Ellie had enacted no longer felt like a heavy burden, but a testament to a love that defied the boundaries of life and death. The impossible note had ceased to be a source of torment and had become a sacred artifact, a final, tangible message from a mother who had loved her daughter with an extraordinary foresight. Ellie found herself sitting by the lighthouse in Camden, watching the beam cut through the dusk, illuminating the dark ocean waves. The rhythmic sweep of the light, the steady presence of the lighthouse, resonated with a new understanding of Martha's life and her own. Martha, like the lighthouse, had always stood firm, guiding her family through the storms, even when her own light was dimming. She thought of the unique nature of Alzheimer's, the cruel irony of a disease that stole identity, yet in rare, miraculous moments, could allow a fleeting, perfect expression of that very identity. Martha had harnessed those moments, not for herself, but for those she would leave behind. It was a profound act of love, a final, artistic expression of her unbreakable spirit. Ellie had also made peace with her decision. She knew with unwavering certainty that she had acted out of the deepest love and respect for her mother. The promise, once a crushing weight, was now a symbol of their unique bond. She had allowed Martha to leave with dignity, to escape the protracted suffering that Alzheimer's and the stroke had imposed. Michael, having moved past his initial anger, was now a steady source of support. He had read all of Martha's notes, had come to understand the depth of her battle and the extraordinary lengths she had gone to communicate. He often came to the cottage, sitting in Martha's studio, reading her journal, finding his own peace in her words. The shared experience of uncovering Martha's secret had forged a new, stronger bond between the siblings, a bond built on vulnerability, truth, and a profound respect for their mother's last, incredible act of love. Ellie realized that Martha's legacy wasn't just her art, or her memory, or even the notes she had left behind. It was the resilience she had shown, the love she had given, and the lessons she had imparted, even in her decline. Martha had taught her to look for the light in the shadow, to find beauty in unexpected places, and to trust her own heart, even when faced with impossible choices. The note on her pillow, the one that had initially caused so much anguish, was now a source of comfort. It was a testament to the enduring power of a mother's love, a love that transcended consciousness, illness, and even death itself. It was a whispered blessing, a final, quiet mercy. Ellie closed her eyes, feeling the cool breeze on her face, listening to the timeless rhythm of the waves. She no longer doubted. She felt Martha's presence not as a ghost of guilt, but as a warm, comforting embrace. The love, like the light from the lighthouse, continued to shine, guiding her, an unbroken thread connecting past, present, and future. Martha was free, and so finally was Ellie.